like there are different seasons of life. I think this is a season where like the benefits of flexibility with our schedule and our time and having a low stress job, they greatly outweigh having that second full-time income right now. And I know that it's just like this period of time, not forever.
Welcome to the Personal Finance for PhDs podcast, a higher education in personal finance. This podcast is for PhDs and PhDs to be who want to explore the hidden curriculum of finances to learn the best practices for money management, career advancement, and advocacy for yourself and others. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Roberts, a financial educator specializing in early career PhDs and founder of Personal Finance for PhDs. This is Season 19, Episode 4, and today my guest is Dr. Jill Hoffman, a former assistant professor who left academia to become a stay-at-home parent and part-time business owner supporting academic entrepreneurs, including me. Jill recounts how she decided that academia was no longer the best place for her, and how she and her husband planned out how to swap roles as the stay-at-home parent and move cross-country to be closer to family. One of the major themes of this episode is how to prepare financially and in your career for transitions. At the end of the interview, Jill gives not only her best financial advice, but also her best advice for someone looking to leave academia and someone starting a side business. I'm looking for interviewees for Season 20 of this podcast. This is your official invitation to volunteer to be interviewed. I love that on this podcast, I get to feature PhDs and PhDs to be who are almost exclusively regular people and learn and share their real life stories and strategies. If it's been in the back of your mind to volunteer, please go to pfforphds.com/podcast volunteer and fill out the quick form, and I'll be in touch over email. I look forward to interviewing you in the coming months. You can find the show notes for this episode at pfforphds.com/S19E4. Without further ado, here's my interview with Dr. Jill Hoffman. Today's episode is a really special one because I have joining me today as a guest, Dr. Jill Hoffman. Jill is actually a returning podcast guest. She was originally on Season 3, Episode 4, and we're going to use the interview today to just kind of like catch up financially and what's been going on in Jill's life overall in the years since she gave us that prior episode. To give you a tiny preview, Jill was a tenure track faculty member at the time of our last interview, and now she's not. And she's doing other things in her life, including working with me in personal finance for PhDs. So that's what we've been doing together for the last about year and a half. Yes. So how did Jill get to this point? Jill, please give us a slightly longer introduction and catch us up to where you were when we had that last interview.
Yeah, sure thing. So I got my PhD in 2016 in social work, and I worked as an assistant professor for 6 years. I quit my job right when I was supposed to go up for tenure, which was 2 years ago, so 2022. And then we moved back across the country to be closer to family from Oregon to Virginia. And now I am mainly a stay-at-home parent. I've got one kid in preschool and one in elementary school, and my husband works full-time. And as you mentioned, we work together. I also have my own small business providing virtual assistant services for online business owners, especially academic entrepreneurs.
So exciting. Let's go all the way back to when you were on the podcast before. We talked a lot about student loans. We talked about public service loan forgiveness. Let's just kind of close that story, first of all.
Yeah, so we have taken student loans are on the back burner right now. Since that time when we were really focused on student loan debt and kind of like figuring out what to do with it, with all of the changes that have been going on with student loans, with like the SAVE plan and with the COVID pause and all those things, we just kind of said, all right, we're not. Nothing's really happening with them at this moment. We're not doing anything with them. I got to a point in because I was doing public service loan forgiveness, I got to a point where I think I have like a little over a year left, until I could potentially get my loans forgiven. But it the trade off between staying in my job, and leaving, it just, for me personally, didn't, the payoff wasn't as good as I thought it would be.
Anything else would you like to tell us about, that maybe the time between our last interview and when you decided to leave your job?
A lot of things have happened since that time, and since kind of that, when I decided to leave. Two kind of big things happened. We had two like family emergencies that happened since we last talked. So at the end of 2019, my dad unexpectedly passed away, and then my mom had multiple major hospitalizations from like 2019 through 2021. And so those two things happened. And then I had, in terms of like life events, not emergencies, I had another baby in 2021. And so it was shortly after my dad passed away that we kind of were like, we're too far from family. We want to move back to the East Coast. We were on the West Coast. And I don't know that this is the job for me. And so we kind of like used that time to figure out like what do we do, because we didn't move until 2022 and I didn't quit until 2022. So we had a couple of years to like figure out what we were doing in terms of next job, and where we were moving.
Yeah, I'm so sorry about your dad passing, especially unexpectedly, and I can certainly understand why that would cause you to rethink what, how you've set up your life and what you want to be doing with it. But obviously, obvious to everyone who's listening, like the decision to leave a tenure track job is huge. So tell us more about what was going on job wise that made you think it wasn't really the right job for you.
Yeah, there are a lot of different aspects to it. I think what it boiled down to was that I always felt like you have like the research, the teaching, the service, the three aspects of the job, and it felt like each of those could be a full-time job in and of themselves, and I felt like I could never do them like I was doing like a mediocre job at all of them. And it never felt like, I felt like I was doing something unattainable, I guess. And I was doing well. I'm like, I was had positive reviews up until that point. It just wasn't. It didn't feel meaningful enough for me to keep kind of working in a job that didn't feel meaningful, I guess, for me. And the teaching aspect, there was a lot of teaching involved in my role, and that was never why I got into academia. I really enjoyed the research part of it. And so while I enjoyed like working with students, especially like one-on-one, and kind of like talking about career plans and things like that, I did not enjoy the teaching aspect, and it just was so draining. Just like I can't do this for the rest of my career.
Mm-hmm. And I remember you had, or maybe still have, a blog, right? Toddler on the tenure track. And I remember that you're into like time management and productivity and those kinds of things. And so obviously you put effort into your job and like trying to do your job as best you can. And you were intentional about that. And you had tools at your disposal and so forth. And it's very obvious to me that the job let you down, like, that, not the other way around, right? Do you want to say anything more about that?
Yeah, I think starting the blog, was my way of like trying to make it something that I wanted to do. Like, it brought like some fun and meaning and like interest to it for me. And so it was almost like, all right, I'm going to figure out how to do this job in a way that like allows me to really enjoy it, because how I'm doing it now is not cutting it, I guess. And so like I think just kind of like taking more time to reflect on like what I was doing, how I was doing it through the blog was like my way of trying to figure out like, can I do this, or is this something that I want to step away from.
And so how did all this work financially, right? Because I also remember from the time of our last interview that I think you had your job, but your husband wasn't working at that time, right? So yeah, talk about how the finances of leaving your position worked.
Yeah. So this was like, we, so my husband was a stay-at-home dad for um, pretty much the entire time we were in Oregon, which is about 6 years. And we kind of slowly made the switch to him working full time and me being at home. When COVID hit, there were like whispers at my university that faculty might be furloughed a day a week. And I did the math in terms of like what income we would lose, and it did not look great. And so my husband and I started kicking around the idea of him getting a part time job um, to boost our income if we needed that. And he ended up getting a remote part-time customer service job with Squarespace that was like incredibly instrumental in helping us get across the country, and just super helpful for making that actually work. And so he started that job in like the fall of 2020. And I can't remember how many hours a week he was working. It wasn't a ton, but we would, as like most people at that time, like no childcare, so we would just kind of like switch off. And I did a lot of evening online classes. And so I would work in the evening and on the weekend, and when he wasn't working during the week. And then we'd like switch childcare or caregiving roles. When I was done, was not an ideal setup, as I'm sure lots of people know. But we knew it would be kind of temporary. I did not end up getting furloughed. So everything that he made, we threw into savings to save up for this move that like we weren't. At that time, it was like, do I get a job? Do I get another job? Like, do I keep my job and do it across the country? Like, what's going to happen? But we knew that we likely wouldn't have an employer paying for our move, so we were saving up for it's expensive to move across the country. So we were kind of thinking towards that goal in terms of finances at that time, of saving up for this potential move. The more like life happened, with my mom being kind of in and out of the hospital and then having a baby and all these things, I got so like burnt out and just like exhausted from life that I was like, I just need a break from like a higher stress career. And so I made that decision to step away, just to kind of like let myself breathe a little bit, even though there's like plenty of plenty of stress and all those things that come with caregiving, and taking care of family members, but not having the added stress of a job on top of that, or like a full-time faculty job, felt a lot better to me, than trying to stay or to move into another role.
We're going to continue with your story in just a second, but I want to make an observation, which is that there was this book that I read. Actually, my husband was assigned this book in college for some class he was taking. I read it afterwards. It's called The Two Income Trap, and Elizabeth Warren is the author or co-author or something like that. And so it's about how middle-class families fall into what she calls the two income trap, which is we have two full-time jobs between the couple, and our lifestyle consumes most all of that income. And so I see in your story, you and your husband intentionally avoiding the two income trap by, if ever there was more than 100, let's say more than one full-time job between the two of you, like you said, that was going into savings. It was like an intentional safety plan or like backup plan, right? To have him get that part-time job when you had income uncertainty. And so at the point that one person has to leave a job or chooses to leave a job or whatever, then the other person in that couple can step up, take a full-time job, and still be providing completely for the family because you've intentionally set your lifestyle so that only one full-time income is needed or something, close to that. So I just want to make that observation that's very unusual, actually. These days, I mean, even since that book was published, it's become more the case that people fall into and live in the two-income trap because cost of living is so high compared to incomes. So I just want to make that observation and ask you, like, maybe how intentional that was from the finances side. I certainly understand why you would do it from like a lifestyle perspective, but how about from that financial perspective? Because your husband also has at least a master's degree, right? He's also like highly educated.
Yeah, he has a master's degree. I think the I think when we first decided that he would be a stay-at-home parent, that was like a definitely a financial decision there in terms of like childcare is so expensive, and he has a master's degree, but he's in his background is in counseling, which not to say you can't have a really high income with a counseling degree, but they're not necessarily known for like super high incomes, and so we figured that like him getting a job when I was working my faculty job, like most of that would be going to childcare, student loans. We'd rather him be able to spend, his time with our kid while I'm working than be at a job and have our kid in daycare. I've been budgeting for a long time in terms of like looking at what's coming in, what's going out. And so we had a good sense for like what we spent in various areas and what we knew obviously what my salary was. And when we moved to Oregon, he didn't have a job, so we were living on just my income and continuing to make it work. And so it stuck. And we like the flexibility that it allows. Like, I think we've just gotten so used to that that like I think to have us both working feels like, even though financially it would be really helpful from like a logistical perspective, it just feels like, oh, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, I remember thinking when my husband and I bought and moved into our house 3 years ago, it was the first time we were homeowners, that there was just so much work to go around. Like, he works full time, I work part time, and we have children, and we have a house to take care of. My goodness, what is this? There's just a lot of work to do. And it is very, very helpful if there's not in the mix 2 full-time jobs as well, right? So let's pick up back with your story and about, gearing up and for that cross-country move.
Yeah. So we moved in 2022 when I made the decision that I was not going to look for another job. My husband started talking to people at his work about like, how can I get to full time? Because we knew that my benefits would not be around forever. And so he was able to move into a full-time position in the same role that he was, the same like customer service role that he was in. This was like 2 months before we moved. It's kind of like last minute switch. It was not, the pay was not great, but it got us benefits and we had a lot in savings. So we knew like we will be okay for a little bit. And we can do like a more focused job search when we get to where we're going if needed. He continued to look at open positions within his company, and the month we moved into another role with his company, a higher paying full-time remote position, which is where he is, what he does currently. And all of those things like allowed us to make all of this work without having to do too much like of a like major job search and like taking time off to interview and all these things, like it, since it was at his employer already, and it was just really really helpful.
Tell me about the cost of living difference between where you were in Oregon and where you live now.
Yeah, so in Oregon, we were in Portland, which is a high cost of living area, and now we're in Richmond, Virginia, which I was looking it up. It looks like it's about average, maybe like a little below average. in terms of cost of living. So that was another really helpful move for us in terms of the house we bought here in Portland would have been like way out of our price range, and so it's just made some things possible that we probably, if we were moving back to like where I'm from in the DC area, I know you're from there too, like we wouldn't have been able to buy a house probably at all. The income difference, so when I was working as a professor, my highest salary was just under 75,000 for like the 10 months. So not super high. We made it work. And right now, our total income is like a little bit above that, like 77,000. So that includes my husband's salary, my part-time work, and then some interest income. And so we have like roughly the same salary in a lower cost of living area. However, we've added one child to our family. And so like we're not saving anything right now, and we're not doing anything with student loans, as I mentioned. And I think it'll probably stay like that until my younger daughter is in kindergarten and I can add on like a client or two. But I think like there are different seasons of life. I think this is a season where like the benefits of flexibility with our schedule and our time and having a low stress job, they greatly outweigh having that second full-time income right now. And I know that it's just like this period of time, not forever.
I think I've mentioned to you before, but I'll say it for the benefit of the listeners who have children or may want to have children in the future. But parenting wise, everything got so much easier when our youngest got to kindergarten. Like I felt like my whole world opened up because they're just so much more independent by that point and being in school and everything. So I can definitely see like just the lifestyle choices that you need to make to get through that like young child period. And like you just said, it's not going to last forever. Like things will be different in just a few years. And so you can always make a different career decision. Either one of you can at that point. Emily here for a brief interlude. Would you like to learn directly from me on a personal finance topic such as taxes, budgeting, investing, and goal setting, each tailored specifically for graduate students and postdocs? I offer workshops on these topics and more in a variety of formats, and I'm now booking for the 2024-2025 academic year. If you would like to bring my content to your institution, would you please recommend me as a speaker or facilitator to your university, graduate school, graduate student association, or postdoc office? My seminars are usually slated as professional development or personal wellness. Ask the potential host to go to pfforphds.com/financial-education or simply email me at emily@pfforphds.com to start the process. I really appreciate these recommendations, which are the best way for me to start a conversation with a potential host. The paid work I do with universities and institutes enables me to keep producing this podcast and all my other free resources. Thank you in advance if you decide to issue a recommendation. Now back to our interview. Let's talk now about your business. Like, why did you start it? Was it primarily motivated by money or something to do with your time and your brain? Like, tell us how that got started.
The business has had like various iterations over the years. So when I was working as a faculty member, I think my role was like community manager for another person in the personal finance space, Jamila Souffrant with Journey to Launch. And so I got a taste for like entrepreneurship through working with her. I did that for about a year and a half. Since that time, I kind of like tried out a bunch of different things, just like curious about like, oh, there's all these people making money online. Like it's opened up a whole new world to me in terms of like what, it just broadened, I guess, my perspective on making an income and that it doesn't have to be the traditional jobs that we think of, like doctor, lawyer, professor, all these things. So I kind of was playing around with various things on my way out of my faculty role. I thought perhaps I'd want to do some like coaching for faculty who are interested in like leaving their jobs. And I used some of my professional development funds to pay for some training in that area because it was like aligned with what I was doing to a student. So I was able to kind of make a case for using money for that or my professional development money for that. But to like run a business, you also need to fund it. I needed more money to like fund the business that I didn't want to pull from like our personal income. And so as I was kind of thinking about how to do that, I think you emailed your list at one point, needing support. And this is after I left my faculty position. You emailed the list, needing some support because you had somebody who had left, and I was like, oh, that fits with like what I, the skills that I have, interests that I have. I'll apply, and so we started working together. And kind of since that time, I've really enjoyed supporting other like small business owners, and I have moved away from the coaching. I did that for a little bit, but really like I enjoy the supporting other entrepreneurs. And so right now I work with you, and I have one other client. Just provided like it depends on like the needs of the business. A lot of like back end support. I thought about adding another client, and I think once my daughter is in kindergarten, I think I'm setting my sights on that time for expansion. But I think right now, like 2 is a good a good number for the amount of time that I have when my daughter is in preschool, because it's not many hours a week.
Yeah, well, this is just a curiosity on my part, because I know that the work that I ask of you is very seasonal. So we have a really busy tax season, and then less at the other times of year, but sort of variable from week to week and month to month. Based on your interest in like productivity and everything like that, like, do you have any, I don't know if it's for me, but strategies for people who go through like busier and less busy like periods?
I think what I find, at least for myself, is like really, I think it can be easy to like try and force yourself to use like whatever task management tool, because other people are using it, or like it can be so easy to get into like, well, other people are using this and they say it works. I'm just gonna like force myself to do it. I think using what works best for your brain is helpful. So I just had like, I used to use Notion a lot, which I still love for like my planning and all those things, but I've been finding that like I needed something a lot more simple. And so now I just have like a notebook where I like keep track of things and write things down and check them off. And so I think really like if something isn't working, try something else. Like figure out a system that works for you and your brain, and that might change depending on like the time of year it is and what you're doing. But don't like feel like you have to force it to make it work, because that just makes it that much harder.
Yeah, I've been reflecting. So as you know, we use Asana to keep track of tasks. And I find that if I get really busy, I need to go outside of Asana and use paper, because in a task management system like that, I mean, I could blame myself too. It's not necessarily the tool, it's the way I use the tool. I find that like everything is given so much equal weight when they're all like different checkboxes on the screen. And I'm like, actually, one of these is much, much, much more important than the other ones. And so the paper helps me clarify like, what are my real priorities for the day or the week or whatnot? Not just like, what is my task management software telling me to do? And I think I've been listening to a lot of Cal Newport recently and reading his books and stuff. And I feel like this is the difference between, I can't remember, he has like some kind of name for it, but basically like checklist productivity versus like actual, like getting things that are important done, productivity. So when things get really busy, I have to draw a distinction between those two and focus on what's actually important versus what I'm being told to do by my software. Let's leave with some words of advice then, a little bit more advice than I usually ask my guests, because the first sort of person I want you to think of is a person who's considering leaving a tenure track position, or maybe even just maybe even before that point, like someone who was going down that route and maybe is deciding to leave graduate school or not pursue a postdoc or just basically step off of the path that they thought they were on. Do you have any advice for that person considering a major career shift?
I'm thinking about the things that were helpful for me that I did. I think one of the main things was like creating a plan, both financially, logistically, on what things could look like when you leave wherever it is you're at. I had so many spreadsheets, so many like Notion databases of just like different iterations of like what me leaving my job could look like and where we would move would look like. And I think obviously this will change depending on if you're going into another job, if you're taking a break between jobs, if you're staying at home, if you're starting a business, if you're moving. I think there's like a lot of different aspects of that when you create like a detailed plan, as detailed as you're able to get, I think those things can become a little bit clearer for you when you have it all out on paper, or the screen or wherever. I remember when we were in the process of like our move, we would have move meetings like once a week, my husband and I, of like, okay, like what are the things, like here's this big goal, like what are the things we need to do to get it done. That was very helpful. But yeah, so I think those things were like intertwined in this process. Especially if you're tenure track faculty, I can't speak to like being a postdoc, and grad school, this might be a little bit difficult. But I think using the resources that are available at your institution to help support you in figuring out what you want to do next. So I think I mentioned earlier, if you have professional development funds to use, is there a skill you want to build? Do you want to get some career coaching? Do some networking at a conference? Buy some books? I think using any and all of the resources that are available to you, if you're able to kind of make a connection to what you're doing in your job, and it's relevant to what you want to do next, I think can be a helpful way to find that extra support.
Yeah, we've heard that advice actually from several other interviewees on the podcast who have made, whether it's like a grad student, graduating and moving on to something else, or a faculty member. I've heard that numerous times. It's kind of amazing that people can make those connections between what they're doing now and what they think they're doing next, and get training that is supportive of both of those roles.
Yeah, yeah. Another thing, like another resource, I guess that was helpful for me, was just like I asked so many questions of HR in this process, just like hypothetical, like if I were to like quit at this point in my contract, like how long will my benefits last? And just kind of getting those logistical pieces that are helpful to know, like, okay, my husband needs to have his health insurance by this date because mine will no longer be in effect. And if that doesn't happen, we need to get temporary health insurance and all those things. I think HR can be a really helpful resource if you're comfortable like talking with them about potentially leaving. So like when my dad died and my mom was hospitalized, I was doing all the like estate settlement, and then I was considering going back and helping with my mom's care, and then COVID happened, so that didn't happen. But I talked through with HR, like I think at that point I was kind of considering like, do I want to quit or do I just need like a significant break? And so I talked with HR about like, can I use FMLA to go care for my mom? Like, how can I take a break without actually quitting and doing the things I need to do? And I didn't actually use FMLA for my parents, but did for when my daughter was born. If like family medical stuff is anyone is going through that, I think they're also a helpful resource to talk through like what your options are. I think another thing that was so helpful for me is to seek out other people who have done what you're trying to do, and talk to them if possible. I had a lot of Zoom conversations, phone calls, just to talk about like how they made it work, any tips they had, and honestly just to like, I think when you're still in the position, it could feel like impossible. Like, this isn't ever going to happen. I'm not going to be able to find something else, or I'm not going to be able to make this work. So just seeing other people, other examples of doing the thing that you want to do, and is so helpful. And there are a number of, at least for like leaving academia, Facebook groups. If you're into Facebook, Academics Say Goodbye, The Professor is Out, PhD Mamas Leaving Academia. Those were three that I joined and kind of like looked into as I was trying to make that decision. And I think also related to other people, like using your network, including family and friends, like tell them about what you're wanting to do. Even if they can't support you directly, they might know somebody who might be able to help you out in some way, whatever it is. And so I think that helped a lot, just kind of like sharing, this is what we're doing. Do you know anyone that might be able to talk to me about X, Y, or Z?
It's not surprising to me that you were able to find so many other examples of people who had left tenure track positions, or those Facebook groups, for example. It's just a little sad. It's just a little sad that this profession, people make it their identity, so that leaving, and academia makes it seem like it's a one-way street, right? You can never get back. It's a permanent decision. So people put a lot of weight on the decision, right? And yet it's also such a difficult place to survive that a lot of people want to leave. It's not everyone's dream job, as it turns out, once you're actually in it. So, but that is really, really great. I thank you for mentioning those groups specifically, and the networking aspect of it. And yeah, we've had numerous people on the podcast too who have left academia. And so I'm pretty sure, including Jill, any of those people would be good ones to reach out to if you are considering, if the listener is considering such a shift. Okay, let's talk about advice then for another type of person, which is someone who wants to start a business, let's say on the side, like part-time, the way that you're doing right now. And they could be at any stage in their career when they want to do that. Do you have any advice for that person?
Yeah, I think a lot of the things that I just shared are applicable too. I think also the networking and just seeking out other people. There are a lot of people, especially academics, who start businesses, it seems. And so talking to those people and asking kind of the same thing, like how did you make this work? Or like finding other podcasts that where people are talking about kind of these types of things. I think too, like if you're in, especially if you're in a faculty position, like it could be helpful to look at like your university's policies on having an outside employment. I know my previous university, because I was in social work, so a lot of people like saw clients outside of our like faculty roles. And so there was definitely language somewhere. I can't remember exactly what it said, but it essentially like, as long as if you're working like during work hours, like no more than 8 hours a week or something, can go to your like outside business or outside income. And so it's just making sure that, like, honestly, no one ever talked to me or asked me about it. But I think just so that you know what the university's policies are, I think that can be super helpful to look into.
I noticed something when you were describing the start of your business as well, which was experimentation, which I did too. And I think a lot of people who start businesses also do. In terms of like businesses that like make it, maybe they become big or, whatever. It's usually those entrepreneurs like third, fourth, fifth, seventh business. Like it's usually not the first thing they've ever tried. And they've had either failures in the past or just things they've abandoned along the way. And you didn't necessarily abandon your business, but you just tried different things, different activities, different ways to make money, different types of clients, and figured out what you preferred. And I've done that too, even within like personal finance for PhDs, different ways of making money, again, different clients to work with, different modalities, and like figured out what worked best for me. So I guess for the listener, like, don't be surprised if the first thing that you try is not the thing that you end up doing after some time. And it's perfectly natural and should be experimented on, because you'll find a good fit along the way. It's not necessarily, even though we were just talking about visioning and planning, like it's not necessarily that your vision is going to work out exactly the way that you thought it would from the beginning, but you can get to that point by just taking steps. So just getting started with something is the best thing to do.
Absolutely. And you learn so much throughout that journey. I think, yeah, I feel like from where I started, I think I started with doing online yearly planning workshops for faculty and grad students, and just have learned an incredible amount since those days. Where it's like, oh wow, this is actually, people are actually paying me to do this. It's wild. So I think it gives you that confidence, and then you learn what you like, what you don't like, and yeah, it's a journey.
Yes. Okay, well, let's wrap up with my official last advice question, which is, what is your best financial advice for another early career PhD? And that can be something that we've touched on in the course of the interview, or it can be something completely new.
I think knowing exactly what is coming in and what is going out in terms of finances, at least for me, has been so impactful. Knowledge is so powerful, especially about your finances. It allows you to make more informed decisions. And I think there's something about seeing all that data, at least for me, it's really motivating, in terms of reaching savings goals, or seeing your retirement funds grow, or I think it helps you, makes you want to do it more. At least I found that. And I think tracking those, your expenses and income in a way that works for you. I know there's a ton of different budgeting apps and tools. I've used a spreadsheet for a long time, and have tried out some apps, but just I always come back to the spreadsheet. And so each year I start out with a new spreadsheet. I have a tab for each month that looks at what we spent, what we earned, that I'm updating on a weekly basis. And then I also keep track of savings, retirement, mortgage, student loans, on a monthly basis. But that spreadsheet has so much, it's just interesting to look at over the years. And in preparation for this interview, I was looking back from 2019 to now, and it's wild, just all the changes that have gone on financially for us.
Yeah, and I think that the tracking, like you said, knowing your numbers, knowing what's coming in, what's going out, enabled you and your husband to make those big financial decisions about jobs and moves and where to live and buying and all the things that have happened in the last few years. Because I think that sometimes people can get so emotionally intimidated by looking at their numbers that they don't, and it becomes an avoidant thing, and then they become paralyzed and they're not able to make those bold decisions to change their lives because they just really don't know what's possible. They can't do the visioning exercises. They can't do the planning because they're just not looking at the numbers. And so that's just the first step, is really just to be able to open that bank account, open it and look at the transactions, look at the balances and everything. And it all kind of flows from there. I was actually just listening to Ramit Sethi's podcast, I Will Teach You to Be Rich, just earlier today. And the episode I'm listening to, as so many of his episodes are, the people he was interviewing, the couple, they were telling themselves a story about their money that was absolutely not true once you actually looked at the numbers. And it's so clarifying to actually look at the numbers, and the answers can come from the numbers. You just have to be brave enough to face, the data. And so I'm really glad to have this story from you, this example of how your finances and your career and everything have all played together, and how you've been able to make those big decisions to do what works for you and your family, especially during the young kid season, the challenging time of life. Yes. So thank you so much, Jill, for volunteering to come on the podcast. It's been lovely to speak with you in a different way than we normally meet.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me back on the podcast. It was fun.
Absolutely. Listeners, thank you for joining me for this episode. I have a gift for you. You know that final question I ask of all my guests regarding their best financial advice? I have collected short summaries of all the answers ever given on the podcast into a document that is updated with each new episode release. You can gain access to it by registering for my mailing list at pfforphds.com/advice. Would you like to access transcripts or videos of each episode? I link the show notes for each episode from pfforphds.com/podcast. See you in the next episode, and remember, You don't have to have a PhD to succeed with personal finance, but it helps. Nothing you hear on this podcast should be taken as financial, tax, or legal advice for any individual. The music is Stages of Awakening by Poddington Bear from the Free Music Archive and is shared under CC by NC. Podcast editing by Dr. Lourdes Bobbio and show notes creation by Dr. Jill Hoffman.